On December 6, 1991, Austin, Texas was shaken by a nightmare that would haunt it for decades. 4 teenage girls, 2 employees and 2 friends visiting, were found bound, gagged, and shot inside a small yogurt shop that had been deliberately set on fire. The brutality of the scene defied comprehension, leaving first responders and investigators stunned and families devastated. In the chaos that followed, law enforcement scrambled for answers. Leads were followed, tips were investigated, and theories emerged, ranging from robbery to gang activity. But the pressure of public outrage, media scrutiny, and a desperate need for resolution led investigators down a dark path. 4 young men, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Morris Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn, were arrested in 1999, accused of a crime none had committed. Confessions were coerced, statements were inconsistent, and no physical evidence tied any of them to the murders. Yet convictions were handed down. Springsteen to death, Scott to life in prison. The consequences of these wrongful convictions rippled far beyond the courtroom. The immense public scrutiny and tension culminated in a tragic confrontation in 2002, when an officer involved in the investigation was shot during an unrelated incident connected to the case, a stark reminder of how deeply this tragedy had entwined with the lives of everyone involved. Meanwhile, one of the accused, overwhelmed by despair and the crushing weight of injustice, died while in custody. Another life irreversibly altered by a system that had rushed to judgment. Even with these dramatic and devastating events, the truth remained elusive. Families grieved, the city demanded justice, and the real killer remained free, moving undetected, while Springsteen and Scott suffered years behind bars for crimes they did not commit. Then, decades later, forensic science offered a glimmer of hope. DNA collected from the crime scene, preserved despite the fire and the passage of time, was re-examined with advanced testing and genetic genealogy techniques. In 2025, the evidence revealed a shocking match, not to anyone ever suspected, questioned, or even connected to Austin. The true perpetrator, a man long invisible to law enforcement, had lived freely while the world searched for a killer who had always remained one step outside the spotlight. The revelations were both relieving and devastating. Relief for the wrongfully convicted came too late to erase the years they lost, or the lives touched and altered in the process. And yet, the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were reminded that the fight for justice was not over, that the story of that night and of the girls whose lives were stolen continued to demand truth. The case stands as a stark lesson in the cost of haste, the fragility of justice, and the enduring importance of science, vigilance, and perseverance. Somewhere, out there, the person responsible for the unimaginable horror had lived 3 decades of freedom, while those left behind bore the weight of both tragedy and injustice. Subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you're not siding with the killer. Do you think you know how investigators work? Think again. Instincts of the investigator shows what they really see when the scene goes quiet. Don't miss it. Grab your copy now, link in bio. Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were not just names on a police report. They were bright, ordinary teenage girls with dreams too fragile to see what was coming. On that December evening in 1991, they moved through life with the same hopeful rhythms as any teenager. School, jobs, friendships, weekend plans. 2 of them, Eliza Thomas, age 17, and Jennifer Harbison, also 17, had earned part-time shifts at a local yogurt shop. I can't believe it's Yoghurt. Their work was simple. Clean up after customers, tend the counters, close down for the night. Jennifer and Eliza were the only 2 staff remaining when closing time approached. On that same evening, Sarah Harbison, age 15, and Jennifer's younger sister, walked into the shop not as an employee but as family. She had stopped by to wait for her sister so they could drive home together. Joining them was Amy Ayers, age 13, the youngest of the 4. Amy and Sarah had spent earlier hours at the nearby North Cross Mall before deciding to go to the shop and catch the ride home. Though they were thrust together that evening by circumstance, these girls had shared parts of a life's journey: school corridors, casual conversations, small dreams. Eliza was saving money with one eye on college, a future she hoped to carve out for herself. Jennifer and Sarah, sisters and confidants, gravitated toward animals and quiet routines at home: pets, afternoon chores, sibling time. Amy, still early in her teens, found delight in music, friendship, small laughter, and the promise each new day might bring.
That night they came together with light hearts, not knowing that within a few hours their stories would become forever altered. Jennifer and Eliza were doing their usual closing duties. Sarah and Amy joined them, chatting, joking, making small talk, until the routine of shutting down the shop would carry them home. In snapshots preserved over time, they appear in photos laughing beside car trunks, stepping out of Austin City school buses, walking neighborhood streets. Each image says, these were young lives going somewhere, together. The bonds among them, friendship, sisterhood, workmates, made their convergence that night feel natural, unremarkable. But in retrospect, those ordinary connections became the thread through which tragedy entered. The fact that they were so ordinary, so human, is what makes the brutality so unbearable.
In each photo, you see more than a face, a future, a sibling, a friend. Inside the shop later that night, first responders would find evidence of horror. The girls had been tied up, gagged, then shot execution style. Some had been stripped of clothing. Then the shop was set ablaze, a final act to destroy what little remained. The fire did its work: closets, walls, debris, phones, shelving. Much was consumed. Evidence that might have told their story was erased. For three of them, Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza, the flames charred their bodies. Survivors later described how their features were rendered almost unrecognizable. Amy's body had slightly different damage. Though she was shot in the same manner, she also suffered second to third-degree burns, but not all parts of her body were charred severely. In one haunting detail, investigators later found that some of the bindings and gags had been fashioned from the girls' own underwear or cloth items. This gruesome fact made clear the violence had been intimate and personal, not random. The innocence they carried into the night was stripped away. The jokes left unsaid, the post-school impressions, the dreams whispered to siblings, all seized in that cruel instant. In the days that followed, families would scour for signs: school yearbooks, status reports, favorite songs, high school rings or watches. In memorial photos, the victims were often shown wearing a high school ring or a Timex watch, small touches of identity that spoke to lives unfinished. From the vantage of today, those girls are more than victims. They are reminders of what was lost: the trajectory of a student, the bond of sisterhood, the laughter of youth, and the silence that followed. As we move into the rest of this narrative, the investigation, the DNA breakthroughs, the long years of doubt, their presence stays central. Their ordinary lives contrast starkly with the extraordinary violence that would claim them, and their memory compels us forward in the search for truth. It was just after midnight on December 6, 1991, when an Austin police officer patrolling the North Cross Mall area noticed smoke billowing from the "I Can't Believe It's Yoghurt" shop at 2949 West Anderson Lane. He immediately radioed for assistance, prompting a swift response from the Austin Fire Department. As the firefighters extinguished the flames, they made a grim discovery inside the shop. 4 teenage girls, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers, were found bound, gagged, and shot execution-style in the head. The shop had been set on fire, likely in an attempt to destroy evidence. The victims' bodies were found in the back room of the store, stacked together. The overwhelming smell of smoke and gasoline mixed with something far worse: a stench of death and despair. The brutality of the crime left first responders and investigators in shock. The fire wasn't meant to destroy the shop, it was meant to erase a crime. For over 3 decades, the case remained unsolved, haunting the Austin community. It wasn't until 2025 that advancements in DNA technology led to a breakthrough. Investigators identified Robert Eugene Brashers, a deceased serial killer, as the prime suspect. The discovery at the yogurt shop was just the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice. In the aftermath of the crime, investigators were left with scant physical evidence. The fire set at the scene had destroyed much of the potential forensic material, and the victims' bodies had been so severely burned that identifying them was challenging. Despite these obstacles, the Austin Police Department formed a task force dedicated to solving the case. Over the years, numerous leads were pursued, including theories involving robbery, revenge, and local gang activity. However, none of these avenues yielded substantial evidence. The case grew colder, and public pressure mounted. In 1999, after 8 years without a breakthrough, the task force arrested 4 young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Morris Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. These individuals were charged with capital murder based on confessions obtained during intense interrogations. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were convicted largely due to their confessions, which they later claimed were coerced. The confessions were inconsistent and lacked details that only the perpetrator would have known. Despite these inconsistencies, both men were sentenced, Springsteen to death and Scott to life without parole. Forrest Wellborn and Morris Pierce were also arrested but did not confess. Wellborn was not indicted, and the charges against Pierce were eventually dropped. The convictions of Springsteen and Scott were overturned in 2006 due to the emergence of new evidence and claims of coerced confessions. In 2009, both men were released from prison. The case remained unsolved until 2025, when advancements in DNA technology led to a significant breakthrough. DNA samples collected from the crime scene were re-examined, and a match was found to Robert Eugene Brashers, a deceased serial killer and rapist who had committed similar crimes across multiple states. The identification of Brashers as the perpetrator brought a sense of closure to the families of the victims and the Austin community. However, it also raised questions about the initial investigation and the wrongful convictions that had occurred. The investigation into the yogurt shop murders is a stark reminder of the complexities and challenges law enforcement faces in solving heinous crimes. It underscores the importance of thorough and unbiased investigations, the need for advancements in forensic science, and the critical role of the justice system in ensuring that the innocent are protected. As the case continues to unfold, it serves as a testament to the resilience of the victims' families and the enduring pursuit of justice. The courtroom in Austin was tense and silent, the weight of tragedy hanging over every seat. Families of Eliza Thomas, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers filled the gallery, faces etched with grief and hope. For years, they had waited for someone to be held accountable for the horror that had unfolded at "I Can't Believe It's Yoghurt." But the justice system, complex and imperfect, was about to reveal how fragile that hope could be. Robert Springsteen's trial began in 2001. Prosecutors presented the confessions he had given years earlier, emphasizing his supposed admissions as evidence of guilt. The narrative was straightforward in the courtroom. These young men had killed 4 innocent girls in a small shop, and society demanded accountability. Outside the courthouse, media coverage was relentless, painting Springsteen as a monster who had terrorized the Austin community. By the conclusion of the trial, Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death. The families, momentarily relieved, felt the first sense of closure in a decade marked by fear, grief, and uncertainty. The case seemed resolved, and for a fleeting moment, justice felt tangible. Michael Scott's trial followed in 2002. Like Springsteen, the prosecution leaned heavily on confessions obtained after hours of police interrogation. Scott was sentenced to life in prison. Again, the families clung to a fragile sense of closure, their hope that justice had been served seeming within reach. But as the dust settled, defense attorneys began uncovering cracks in the case. Statements that had been presented as confessions were inconsistent, often contradicting one another. Hours of coercive interrogation had pressured young men into admitting things they could not reliably recall. No physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA connected Springsteen, Scott, or any of the other accused to the scene. The fire that had been set had destroyed much of the forensic material, leaving investigators and jurors to rely primarily on these statements. Questions grew louder. Could confessions extracted under duress truly serve as the foundation for convictions? Were these men guilty, or were they victims of flawed investigative methods and intense public pressure? The legal system, tasked with protecting the innocent while punishing the guilty, now faced scrutiny. The trials left the community unsettled. News coverage documented the drama, the emotional testimony of family members, and the courtroom tension, but it could not hide the unease. Convictions were achieved, yes, but at what cost? Without physical evidence, the cases against Springsteen and Scott rested on words alone, and as appeals would later reveal, the truth might not have been so simple. The families, meanwhile, remained caught between relief and doubt. They had endured years of waiting, had watched their daughters' cases drag through the judicial system, and finally witnessed sentences handed down. Yet beneath that relief lingered the unsettling awareness that the certainty they had hoped for was, perhaps, an illusion. The trials and convictions would ultimately be a prelude to further revelations, discoveries that would challenge decades of assumptions, overturn verdicts, and redefine the search for justice. In the shadows of the courtroom, the question lingered. Had the right people been held accountable for the unimaginable tragedy at the yogurt shop? Years had passed since the courtroom drama ended, yet the shadows of doubt lingered over the Austin community. The convictions of Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott had seemed like the final word on the horror at "I Can't Believe It's Yoghurt," but the story of the four girls was far from over. In 2008, a breakthrough in forensic science offered a new lens on the decades-old case. DNA testing technology had advanced to a level that investigators in the 1990s could only dream of. Samples that had been collected at the crime scene, hairs, bodily fluids, traces from the bindings, were now being re-examined with unprecedented precision. The results were staggering. Unknown male DNA was identified on the evidence. Not only did it fail to match Springsteen, Scott, or any of the other men previously implicated, it pointed toward an entirely different perpetrator. The foundation of the convictions, once considered unshakable, began to crumble. By 2009, after years of appeals and legal battles, the convictions against Springsteen and Scott were vacated. Both men walked free from prison, their names cleared, but the emotional toll was immense. For the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy, the release was bittersweet. Relief for the innocent men's freedom was overshadowed by the grim reality that the real killer had yet to be identified. A family member reflected on the cruel twist of fate. It felt like losing them all over again. The DNA shock not only exonerated two wrongfully convicted men, but also reignited the investigation into who had truly committed one of Austin's most notorious crimes. The new evidence became the key to finally closing a chapter that had haunted the city for nearly 2 decades. The revelation sent ripples through law enforcement and the public alike. It was a reminder that truth can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right tools to reveal it. And in the case of the yogurt shop murders, the truth had been hiding in plain sight, encoded in the very DNA left behind by the killer, waiting to speak. The DNA shock of 2008 had cleared the wrongfully convicted, but it had also reignited the investigation, forcing authorities to confront the grim reality. The real killer had been living freely, untouched by justice. By the mid-2010s, advances in forensic science and genetic genealogy began to offer new avenues. investigators revisited the unknown male DNA collected from the crime scene, running it through national databases and comparing it against family trees, historical records, and genealogical markers. Each lead was painstakingly traced, each connection scrutinized. The case, cold for decades, was slowly beginning to warm. Then, in a breakthrough that stunned both law enforcement and the public, the DNA pointed toward a single individual, Robert Eugene Brashers, a man who had died years earlier. Brashers, already a known serial offender, had a history of violence and sexual assault across multiple states, crimes that mirrored the brutality and methodology of the yogurt shop murders. Investigators realized that the signature left at the scene, the bindings, the execution-style shootings, and the deliberate attempt to set fire matched his known patterns. The revelation was both shocking and chilling. Brashers had never been questioned in connection with the Austin murders, and yet the forensic evidence now left no reasonable doubt. He had lived 3 decades with the secret of what he had done, moving through life while the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy sought closure in vain. For the detectives who had poured years into the case, it was vindication, but a bittersweet one. Justice, in the traditional sense, could no longer be served. Brashers was dead, never having faced a courtroom, never having answered to the city he had terrorized. The full weight of the tragedy remained with the families, the community, and the investigators who had chased leads across decades, always hoping for the breakthrough that would finally reveal the truth. This closing of the loop, however, was not merely about identifying the perpetrator. It was a testament to perseverance, the relentless march of forensic science, and the enduring hope that even the coldest cases might one day speak. DNA had finally told the story that human investigation alone had failed to uncover, and yet a shadow remained. The horror of that night, the lives stolen, the innocence destroyed, these were realities that no breakthrough could erase. The city of Austin would always remember the tragedy at the yogurt shop, a dark chapter now explained, but still profoundly felt. In the end, the killer had been found, but the damage, the heartbreak, and the lost years would never be returned. The rain begins again, falling softly over the streets of Austin, echoing the countless nights of uncertainty, grief, and hope that the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy have endured. Decades have passed since that horrific night at I Can't Believe It's Yoghurt, yet the pain, love, and determination of their parents and siblings remain unwavering. Through the years, the families have navigated sorrow, frustration, and the long shadows cast by wrongful convictions and unanswered questions. They have spoken at press conferences, demanded justice, and carried the memory of their daughters into every day, refusing to let the tragedy be forgotten. A parent once said, "We'll never stop until we know who did this to our girls." It is a statement not just of grief, but of resilience. It is a call to action, a promise that the search for truth does not end with time or circumstance. Their strength is a testament to love and courage, and a reminder that the memory of the victims continues to inspire vigilance and hope. The story of the yogurt shop murders is a dark one, but it also speaks to the power of persistence, the advancements in forensic science, and the enduring quest for justice. Every clue, every lead, and every voice matters. If you have information, contact the Austin Police Department Cold Case Unit. In memory of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy, December 6th,
1991. And as the rain continues to fall, the world is reminded of the lives lost, the families left behind, and the hope that one day justice will finally be complete. Subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you're not siding with the killer. Do you think you know how investigators work? Think again. Instincts of the investigator shows what they really see when the scene goes quiet. Don't miss it. Grab your copy now, link in bio.